Hello, everyone. This is Cole from the American Journal of Healthcare Strategy, joined by Henry Burns of Houston Methodist, an excellent administrative fellow with some really interesting experiences he's going to share with you today. Henry, please just introduce yourself and give a little bit of background.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, everybody. My name is Henry, and I am one of the administrative fellows at Houston Methodist, and I'm just wrapping up kind of the end of my 18 months. So, really looking forward to the conversation today.
Thank you so much for coming on. I really do appreciate it. And how many fellows, just real quick, are there at Houston Methodist in your cohort?
Yeah, so this year, my cohort of fellows, we have three of us. So, Houston Methodist, it's an 18-month fellowship, and so there is some overlap as the new fellows begin. And then my cohort is kind of going and moving on. And so, right now, I guess there's six of us kind of moving about the system, but generally, about three per cohort is what we've done in the past.
Excellent. Wow. So this is a busy time for everyone then.
Yes, yeah, it's super exciting. It's always fun to kind of have that opportunity. I know I appreciated the opportunity to get to know the fellows above me and experience their mentorship, and so it's a kind of a great part of the process to be able to give back and engage with the new fellows and welcome them to the system because I remember how much it meant to me. So it's an awesome time for sure.
Yeah, that is a big deal. That's one of the things I've heard from a lot of fellows who've liked their program is how important it was networking with those previous fellows. And there's still quite a few that are still with Houston Methodist, right, from the last cohort.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So I think that's one thing that Houston Methodist does a great job of is trying to retain the fellows even long after the fellowship ends. We have actually several of our executives have gone on to become executives within the system just straight after becoming fellows, and sometimes not even leaving the organization. So that's always fun to see for sure.
That can make a big impact coming in as a fellow early in your career, right? To see other people who are now executives coming from that, that's a big deal. So I want to talk about where you started, though. You started at Baylor, and you're not from. I think you and me have talked about this before, where you're not from the Texas area, right? You're from originally. I'm trying to remember, is it the Minnesota area?
It is, yeah. So just outside the Twin Cities, just outside of St. Paul. So yeah, grew up in the Twin Cities, moved down to Texas for my undergraduate degree at Baylor, and then went back for my MHA at the University of Minnesota. So I tend to bounce back and forth between the two.
And so biochem, right? Probably the hardest subject that filters out most of we call it the big filter for pre-meds. You did a whole major in it, and you didn't change your major, right? And what prompted you to switch from pre-med to MHA while clearly doing pretty well in your courses?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it kind of goes back to why I started with biochemistry. And so in high school, I really loved science classes. It really kind of just was an area that I appreciated learning about and kind of spoke to me. And so I was like, that seems like a great place to start as far as a major goes. I don't think anybody's ever too sure when they're starting out about where they'll end up, but it seems like a good starting place. And so as I got started at Baylor, I just found myself continuing to like those classes. I appreciated my professors, the coursework, and the people that I was meeting throughout my degree. And so I was honestly having a great experience with biochem. But as I started to look down the path a little bit further and think about being pre-med, it was something that actually fairly early on I was starting to give more thought to and thinking, I'm not actually sure if that's where I'm supposed to be and where I actually want to go in life. And so as I gave that more thought and started to think about why, I know that was a huge thing that people in med school would talk to us about is you have to really know your why because med school is going to be hard. People in their residency would share that their residency was hard, and they're like, we experienced burnout despite having this intense why behind why we're going into medicine. And I was thinking like, oh, wow, I just don't know if I have that burning intense why. But it was really interesting to me to hear people say like, I do have that why, but I still feel like I'm burnt out and I'm not enjoying what I'm doing anymore. And so that spoke to me actually. And then through a friend in my analytical chemistry class, I actually heard about MHA programs. And so did some research on that. And all the pieces kind of arranged themselves and kind of came together. And I was like, it would be a really cool way to get engaged with healthcare, still stay close to a subject that means a lot to me, but just maybe engage in a different way through the MHA and then healthcare administration, still being able to work with a lot of the care teams and physicians that I, was getting to do school alongside, but then potentially down the road, hopefully make their circumstances better so that when they were in the workplace, they weren't experiencing so much burnout and creating an environment that was fun to practice medicine in, where they felt like they had what they needed and were empowered to really provide that best care that we possibly could for patients. And so that's kind of what motivated my transition to the MHA.
That's a really important motivation. I'm sure that a lot of your colleagues now, especially your clinician colleagues, really appreciate that that's what your motivation is. Interesting topic to come up during analytical chemistry is an MHA program. That's great. And then, of course, like you mentioned, you did do the MHA at the University of Minnesota. We know quite a few people from that school. How did you like that program?
Yeah, it was tremendous, honestly. It was, again, like I told you, I was kind of late to the game as far as MHAs went. It wasn't something where I was in high school knowing about that career path, and so I was learning a lot on the fly. And so that was actually something where um, just doing my research on schools, Minnesota made sense logistically. I had family there, and so a lot of ties to the state already. And then doing some more research about the program just felt like it made a lot of sense to me. I really appreciated the focus on public health. It was a lens that I did not get a whole lot of during my undergraduate time. And so I was like, that would be a cool place to go ahead and plug in a little bit more. And then I also really appreciated the alumni network. That was something that everybody at the school really spoke highly about, whether it be the folks that were running the kind of welcome or info sessions, so you can learn more about the program. They spoke about that a lot. And then even getting into the program, that was one thing I noticed right away, is that the alumni were super plugged in, whether it be as mentors for us as first year students or really throughout our project work. It was definitely a culture of like, if I'm working on a project related to throughput and I noticed that there's somebody in the area, one of the local health systems that's an alumni, you had that confidence to be able to say, like, I'd love to hear more about how this looks in your arena, and pick up the phone and reach out to them. And they definitely had that attitude of returning your calls and setting up some time to meet. And so that, I think, was something that I heard a little bit about, but then once I got in, realized just how impactful that was. So yeah, the program itself was tremendous. So very, very grateful for the opportunity to take part in it.
And part of it is that residency that you did at Betty Ford, right?
Yes, that's right. Yeah, that was something in between my first and second year.
And so, what kind of work did you do during that residency? Was it in hospital, ambulatory? Just tell us a little bit about what that was like.
Yeah, so it was actually super unique, and that's part of the reason why I wanted to pursue my residency there. Is I was like, it's such a great opportunity for me to plug into an area of healthcare that is growing in importance. I think we're really coming to recognize how important behavioral health is in providing holistic care to patients. And so I think that that was really cool for me to experience, and it really is different than your traditional inpatient, outpatient kind of hospital setting. Even though there are some similarities, there still are residential treatment programs, and then treatment programs that you can go to that are, more intensive. You go for several hours a day, but still stay at your own house, or even less intensive, kind of more traditional outpatient programs where you might go a few times a week for an hour, a couple hour sessions. And so it was cool to understand that entire landscape during my time at Hazel and Betty Ford. Really appreciated the way everybody there was really welcoming. I think they did a great job, at least for me, helping me understand what the differences were and why those differences existed between your traditional hospital setting and maybe a residential inpatient treatment setting in the behavioral health world. And so I appreciated their guidance through that. And my work, I would say, ranged significantly when I was an intern there. And then when I even went on to stay on as kind of an independent consultant in my second year. It was cool to be able to take part in their falls reduction program and really take a look at their risk assessment tool that they were using to kind of help determine who was at risk at falling, and do honestly kind of a clinical based project. That was something where for me, I didn't have a lot of work experience in the clinical setting. And so I think it was a cool opportunity to engage and see how I could partner with folks that were clinicians, and work with them to develop and select a tool that hopefully would provide a little bit of use for them compared to the one they were currently using. But then some more of your traditional, more administrative projects like OKRs and things like that came up along the way as well. So definitely a wide range of things, but overall a super great experience, I would say, just learning about a completely different world in healthcare.
Did it give you or impact you in any way on what you decided to do for fellowship? Whether you were going to do a fellowship or where, did it influence that decision?
Yeah, I think that a couple things come to mind as you ask that question. So I would say maybe less about the where, as far as where I wanted to do my fellowship, but I would say my approach to the fellowship definitely was influenced by that experience, because as I was taking that opportunity, there was an aspect of me that was like, this isn't necessarily what I'm learning in my coursework. So it's going to require me asking more questions and really honestly, like, recognizing that I'm not the expert in the room and being willing to just kind of ask basic questions of folks and say, hey, I honestly just don't know this. Like, can you explain why this is to me? And I think that that practice and experience that I got doing that during my internship carried over super well to the fellowship, because that's a huge part of the fellowship, is just being able to recognize, like, even as you come out of your graduate school experience and you're feeling like, wow, I know so much after this degree, there still is like an ocean's worth of information to learn after you get into the workplace. And so having practice recognizing when I'm not the expert in the room and when to ask those questions was super helpful. And that attitude of kind of exploring, I think, also lends itself super well to the fellowship. So I'd say that's kind of what comes to mind as you ask that.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And so when you went in through the first couple weeks, where you started to get your projects, do you think that it would have been harder if you had not had that experience during your MHA program?
As far as it related to my residency,
Yeah.
yeah, I would say it definitely would have been harder. Just getting that practice, I think, was super helpful, and so definitely made that transition a lot easier. Just having practice doing something like that does make a lot of difference. So I think that definitely did help me out.
I appreciate you sharing that because a lot of the potential MHA candidates are trying to consider whether to go to a program that has an internship or requires an internship, and I've been trying to encourage them based on our interns. It's probably a good idea. It does give you a little bit of an edge. So I appreciate you sharing that. And then, of course, you did decide to do a fellowship, but why Houston Methodist, right? You were in Minnesota at the time. You'd been to Texas and back and forth, and so you kind of had probably anywhere that you could have gone. But why Houston Methodist? How did that come about?
Yeah, I would say that that is something where, like you mentioned, I think similar to how I chose a graduate school, geography was a factor. I think that's something that I feel pretty passionate about, is that it's tempting when you're starting the fellowship process to just look and think like, I just have to get a fellowship and I'm willing to compromise on where I'll live and some of that to just make that happen. And I would really encourage people, and something that I'm glad that I got that advice early on, is to make sure, like, just taking a little time to think for yourself is like, would I be happy and have what I need to be successful in a fellowship in the area that I'm looking at? And so I really did want my opportunity to be in Texas or Minnesota. Houston Methodist, of course, checked that box. But I think what really made Houston Methodist stand out to me is again, another huge part of the application process was the meetings that I would have with the different organizations ahead of time. I think, first of all, that's another thing about the healthcare industry that I've grown to really appreciate, is how open everybody is to helping out. I haven't really met anybody that's not willing to take 30 minutes out of their day to explain what they do to me or explain their experience. And so as I was doing that with several organizations, Houston Methodist, I really appreciated how they responded to my questions. And honestly, one thing that stood out a lot was, as I met with the fellows, at that time there were six, like I kind of mentioned earlier, and I would meet with one of them and they would be talking about a project or something they were working on. And they were like, oh, you know what, you should actually reach out to my co-fellow because they had good experience with that. And they kind of redirected me to the point where I'd actually met with all six of them by the time it was time to really apply and go throughout their interview process. And I was like, that is super cool that, knowing that I would be moving back across the country, that I do kind of have some built-in friends in addition to colleagues, just by the way they talked about one another. So that stood out. And then some of the logistics about the program, I think, were phenomenal. I was reading about the opportunities that fellows get at Houston Methodist, and it was one of those things where I just continued to get more and more excited about it. And I could really tell that that was something that I wanted to go do. And so that's another thing that I always encourage folks to take a look at, is pay attention to how you're feeling as you're learning things about organizations, because it of course was work for me to set up meetings and do all that research, but it was one of those things that it was like giving me energy and making me excited for the fellowship process at Houston Methodist. And I think that that was a huge kind of significant factor in the interview process. And then also now that I'm in the opportunity, I think has definitely shaped my experience in a positive way. So
And now, so part of what you're doing now, though, is you review potential applicants as well, right? As the okay, so the reason I ask that, you were motivated, you were excited, you really wanted to be there geographically, but also at the institution. You felt like you had some common, shared associates or friends. Do you think that improves the application? Does that come through in the application when someone is excited?
tremendously, yeah, I would say it is, honestly, it makes a huge difference, and you can genuinely tell. And that's, I think it all goes back. I think people a lot of time talk about fit with an organization. And I think it's sometimes I've been on both sides of it, right? Where I have been an applicant and I hear that, oh, we're just looking for the right fit. And I'm like, I appreciate that answer, but I don't know what that means necessarily.
Yeah.
Like, does that, like, is this going to help me be a good candidate or a bad candidate? I don't really know what fit means. But really kind of having had the chance to really be on both sides, I think a huge part of fit is being excited about the opportunity and then sharing that with the folks that you're applying with, because I think a lot of people are very happy to be with the organization they are with. And I think that's a huge thing at Houston Methodist is a lot of people are proud to work for Houston Methodist. And it's a blessing for me, honestly, to be a part of an organization like that. And so I think when people come and they have a genuine excitement about their application and their interview and all of that, it lends itself nicely to that concept of fit, because it's like we're all excited about what we're doing, and so it's always so fun to talk to people and meet people that are also excited about that same mission and same goal, and some of that how as well. Even digging deeper into the details. If somebody's coming in and is talking about, hey, I did this research and I heard about this initiative y'all have going on, and it's really exciting for me. That's always like it's like music to our ears, because it's like it's super cool when somebody's genuinely excited with you on some of that. So.
So this is key advice for for the upcoming classes here. Really important advice. When you were applying, though, how many? You mentioned you had to do a lot of research and a lot of meetings. How many programs did you apply for?
Yes, I really looked at 6 programs. I got some advice to kind of keep it in the 5 to 7 fellowship range. And I think that I would agree with that, because I think that it kind of forces you to really evaluate, kind of like I was mentioning, kind of how excited you are about those different opportunities. As you think about a fellowship, you're not really going to know 100% about the organization that you're applying to when you're doing that application process. But if you are finding yourself like getting less excited about an opportunity, or that it does feel like it's more work, then rather than it being kind of exciting and fun to learn more about the organization, I always encourage folks that's a good signal to kind of reevaluate and think like, hey, like, am I just applying to this one to apply? Or do I really feel like if I got that offer, I would be really excited and eager to accept it? And I think that that is a huge differentiator. So I would say, yeah, I did apply to 6, but really I felt that to some extent where I was kind of evaluating. There were some that I looked at and ultimately didn't apply to because I just didn't think that it was a great fit, and kind of realized that internally as well. Like, oh, if I got that offer, I just would not be as excited compared to some of the other opportunities that I had learned about. And so I think it's different for everybody, and I think that everybody can find their fit. But knowing kind of where your line is also different for everybody.
Can I ask how many you got interview requests from?
Yeah, I was actually fortunate enough to get interviews at all of them, and so that was also a blessing and really humbling, honestly, because going into the MHA process, it was one of those, like I had mentioned before, it had not been something that I knew about my whole life, and was something that I had to rely a lot on my school and my peers within my program, really bouncing ideas off of them, and honestly, one of the huge big parts about my time at Minnesota was that I really cherished the fact that there were so many people in there that had such rich experiences that I could just sit and listen to and learn from. And so I think that that played a huge factor in that, success as far as those interviews went. Just hearing my classmates and my peers and how they went about their processes really helped and influenced me. So I think that that definitely was a huge factor.
It is interesting in speaking with so many fellows that people who apply for more and more programs, right? It doesn't necessarily increase their success rate. It seems like the highest success is right, like you said, that five, range. I have not met with someone who's applied for less than five and not gotten their fellowship. I've met people who've done one, two, three. All of them have gotten their key fellowship. And I just think it's important to emphasize that this is not like traditional applications, right? Like, how different was this than your MHA application?
Yeah, I think, it is different, for sure, because, I think that the process is completely different, as you're thinking about, like, applying to undergraduate or graduate schools. It very much is something where you kind of have to let your resume and your written components of your application speak for themselves. Obviously, say for a few exceptions with, undergraduate schools, and then also graduate schools, a lot of the time do interviews as well. But it really is a different part of that process when you're evaluating a place where you're going to go ahead and work, because I think that transition to the workplace is different because you're starting to go from like a student where you're the one learning and taking in information and you're trying to find the best place for you to kind of grow and develop it. Then you move to the workplace and it's a different kind of opportunity of you're trying to find a place where you can continue to grow and develop, but then also that organization is looking at you as somebody that they're hoping to grow into a leader. And so they're hoping that you ultimately one day can provide value as well. And so it becomes a different type of application. And so I definitely think there is nuance to that. And I think that you're completely right. I really agree with what you said about the number not being necessarily the defining factor, because I know for me, those 6 opportunities that I was really looking at, being able to take time, dive deep on each of those, really, I think allowed me to have success in those endeavors. But had I been applying to, 10, 15, or 20, I don't think I would have been able to devote the same level of depth to all of those opportunities. And I think that it probably would have resulted in me not getting interviews and not being considered at some of those for sure.
Thank you for sharing that, because it can be stressful, right? Especially for our international applicants who've been really trying to help. They can't find places that accept their visas, and they're stressing out because to get into college they applied for 30 or 40 schools, and then we try to say don't do that. Just find a couple that you really appreciate, and then it'll come through. And so I want to ask you: you did all this research, you know met all these great people, you really enjoyed the process of getting started, but 18 months later, did it live up to the expectation?
Yes, I would say like a resounding yes, like 100%. I knew coming out of graduate school that I wanted to pursue a fellowship. But again, it's just like kind of going to graduate school. You can't know 100% what grad school is going to be like. And I've said it before, but you also can't know what your fellowship is going to be like 100% until you get there. And there are so many people at Houston Methodist that I would want to thank for the opportunity that I've had here. It's just, whether it be the executives that I rotate with, as far as the rotations go, we have several of them that we do. So we spend time with a lot of people throughout the system, and they kind of devote one-on-one mentorship time to us and help grow us through projects and are really careful to explain what they do to us on a day-to-day basis. That is like, there's nothing that can really top that as far as a growth opportunity, really to help you evaluate kind of where you want to go as a leader. And also just that has created so much space for me to really reflect as well. And I think that that's so unique. I've never, gone through this long of a time in my life where I've just been reflecting on like how, my leadership journey is going, kind of all of those different topics were not things that I thought about super frequently before the fellowship. And so it would be hard to go back after the fellowship. So I think it's been a huge frame shift as far as my experience, but also my attitude and outlook on healthcare. And then also the folks that I've met along the way at Houston Methodist, on the teams that I've had the privilege of being able to be a part of. I think that a huge part about Houston Methodist that I, again, can't express how grateful I am for is that it's not just the executives that welcome me when I go to a new rotation. It's really the folks that I'm working with on projects, or they're not even really necessarily affiliated with the fellowship or are the ones accepting a fellow. But as soon as I'm there, they're like, oh my gosh, like, it's great to have you. Like, let's get you plugged in. If you have questions, like, come find me. If you want to set up time for me to just explain what I do to you, like, that would be like perfect. And so that opportunity and really welcoming culture that I've experienced has like really made this an unforgettable time. And so like I've said, it's something I'm incredibly grateful for. And it's been such a blessing for me.
That really sounds really beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. And so I'm sure, like many of the audience, I am considering, applying for a job at Houston Methodist after hearing that. So one of the things that a lot of the audience, including myself, might be wary of, despite Houston Methodist sounding so awesome, is Texas. But you keep returning to Texas, so you have to explain, what do you like about living in Houston? Do you plan to stay in Houston, post fellowship?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say that, yeah, Texas and Minnesota are definitely two very, very different places. Houston is honestly something that I have grown to really appreciate and enjoy being a part of. I actually really appreciate how diverse the city is. I've seen some statistics that Houston is one of the most diverse cities in the United States, if not the most diverse city. And so that's actually something that I've really appreciated coming from Minnesota, is to get to experience all that comes with such a diverse city, whether it be different types of cuisine. I'm a huge foodie, and so I've like been able to go to restaurants that are authentic foods from places that I had never had the chance to go to before, but also just to see all the different types of people that interact with Houston Methodist and all the ways that Houston Methodist is plugging back in to the community. It's definitely very nuanced here in Houston, and it's awesome. I would say Houston Methodist navigates it super well. That's one of our, I would say, a huge strong point of the fellowship as well, is that our preceptor, Kathy Easter, she does oversee our community benefits department. So as a fellow, you kind of do have a front row seat into seeing how Houston Methodist is plugging in and working with groups in the community. I would say that there's a lot of folks in Houston that are trying to make positive change on, the non-medical drivers of health and things like that. And one thing that I really appreciate is that Houston Methodist doesn't always pretend to be the expert in those areas. You actually see us partnering with a lot of those organizations a lot of the time to try and make sure that we're letting the folks that have the expertise in the given field really provide the support that the citizens of Houston need. And so I would say that, like you said, very different from where I grew up, but I would say that that's also contributed to my growth, is just being exposed to a different way of life and experiencing kind of what Houston has to offer. So I would say, even encouraging folks like to go outside your comfort zone a little bit when it comes time to look for a fellowship. Don't go someplace you won't like, but also if it means taking a little bit of a risk and stretching a little bit, I feel like that's what I ended up doing. And I, again, have been super, super happy with how that's turned out. So.
Yeah, very, very good advice, and thank you for sharing. I mean, we can tell it's genuine. We really appreciate it. So thank you for your time coming on, Henry, and all the rescheduling that you've dealt with and cancellations. It's been a hard episode to schedule, and I apologize, but thank you so much for doing that and coming on.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been my pleasure. And thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate it.